the edge of the courtyard there, as Peter was denouncing him, and it says, and Jesus looked him in the eye as he did it. So it wasn't just that last one got personal really fast. You know. Now, we will get, well, Matthew does more of that. So does John. But, you know, we do have Jesus coming back and helping Peter back from it. Takes a while. It'll be after the resurrection, all of that. But so verse 62, Peter went outside and wept bitterly. And then our focus from here on goes to Jesus in the story. So the men who were guarding Jesus began mocking him and beating him. They blindfolded him and demanded, "Prophesy, who hit you?" And they said many other insulting things to him. At daybreak, the council of elders of the people, both the chief priests and the teachers of the law, met together, and Jesus was led before them. "If you are the Messiah," they said, "tell us." All right, something we miss here. It says that the council of the elders of the people, both the chief priest and the teachers of the law, met together. What we fail to recognize sometimes is these were two diametrically opposed groups. They despised each other. Right? The chief priests were political. We'd often say they were Sadducees. All right? That was their political party. And it was far more than just not believing in the resurrection. All right? I know it works. They were Sadducee because they didn't believe in the resurrection. That was just one of the hot topic issues between these two political parties. Actually, you could almost think of them as Democrat and Republican. You can call either one whichever one you want. I don't care. But it was a two-party system in Judah at that point. The chief priests were the technical term would be Hellenists. They were the ones who were more willing to give into Greek and Roman culture and Greek and Roman politics. They gained their power from the Roman governors. They weren't very pious people when it came to their Jewish faith. They had sort of checked it in for political power and whatnot. While the scribes, this is the Pharisees. This is the other party. They were the grassroots party. They were the ones with religious zeal. The ones, they would have been the conservative party, if you want to think of it that way. Because those were signs given only to the Messiah. And actually look back in your Old Testament history. You will not find a prophet anywhere healing the mute, the blind, and the deaf. That was one of the keys they were looking for. Now it's interesting, there's one or two passages that sort of might refer to the Messiah doing that, but it was really more of a tradition that had just built up. You know, a prophecy that wasn't necessarily based on Old Testament text, but that the Jews really believed. Jesus fulfilled it anyway. Actually, you can find a lot of those. That would be interesting study sometime. There were a lot of things Jesus did to fulfill prophecies that weren't even made by the prophets, that had just sort of grown up around the mythology of who the Messiah would be. He fulfilled them all. Biblical, non-biblical, didn't matter. So they're saying, if you're the Messiah, tell us. Well, if they've been paying any attention, they know. And that's what worries them. Because if he's the king, who has the power? He does. Exactly. They don't. You know, the Sadducees, who the chief priests who get their power from Rome, well, if he's truly the Messiah and is going to liberate Israel, they're in trouble. Because they buddied up to Rome through all of this. And he's proven himself to a lot of the Pharisees that he's not going to play their games. That he's not impressed with their hypocrisy. Now, again, I have to be careful here. Not all Pharisees were hypocrites, all right? Most of Jesus' early followers were probably Pharisees. And Jesus still had a lot of Pharisees who followed him because they were the ones more dedicated to Scripture. Some of them were figuring it out, but the ones who loved the power, who had come up against Jesus, yeah, there's your problem. All right? So Jesus answered, into verse 67 there. If I tell you, you will not believe me. And if I asked you, you would not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the mighty God. So he throws it at him two ways. He says, I'm not going to answer because if I told you, you wouldn't believe me. What do you think he means by the second one, though? And if I asked you, you would not answer. What would he ask them? The same question, actually. If he said, am I the Messiah? You tell me. They won't answer because they knew the people considered him to be the Messiah. Remember what happened just a couple days earlier. All right, he walks into Jerusalem as a king. That's the real popular sentiment. And that's something I want you to keep in mind as we go through the rest of this. You have the crowd chanting, crucify him, crucify him. That 99% sure was not all of Jerusalem. That was the people that the chief priests and the scribes had stirred up. Those were the rioters, the protesters, however you want to think of them. All right? Most of Jerusalem was probably hiding as this happened. Right? Because this was huge. That's not even a good word. Most people would have been scared to death that war was coming, that something incredible was about to happen, because they really believed he was the Messiah. So you have this crowd that's going to be chanting, crucify him, crucify him. Don't blame all the Jews for that. All right, because you'll see after everybody's talking. You know, did you hear what happened? Did you see what happened? Most of them weren't involved in what happened there. Think about it. If there was a riot starting downtown, how many of y'all would run to join in? Yeah, hopefully none of you. Nothing was different 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, the thing that's kind of interesting is when we read the scripture, and it's like when Christ goes before Pilate, and Pilate's asking, what do I do with him? Mm-hmm. They kind of act as if there's thousands of people in this crowd, where other depictions that I've seen of it, the courtyard where Pilate did that was relatively small. Mm-hmm. There might have been 100, 150. So it was really a small group. Or a few hundred at most, yeah. It was a small group of very anti-Jesus people that were making a lot of noise.
Yep.
And they won the day, because they were willing to make a lot of noise. Whereas, you think of all the people that were out there cheering him on as he came in on Palm Sunday, where were they? It's like, so they were probably hiding in their houses because...
They were like the apostles. They were scared. They weren't there. But that's a good point. Yeah, if you actually go back and look at the palace compound, this wasn't something like the old Ben-Hur movie or whatever, where you see thousands of people chanting and screaming. It was probably, like you said, a much smaller group. Well, think how much power the vocal minority often has to this very day.
It's almost kind of like some of the riots that take place today.
Yeah.
It's not all the people, it's few.
Go back to the riots last year. There might be 1,000 people involved in news coverage and the whole city shuts down and all that, but you're talking cities of millions of people. Small groups can do large things, especially when they get unruly and are exerting political influence, especially when they're backed by the powers that be. Right? That's the other thing you can't forget. With the chief priests and the scribes and teachers supporting this, all the political power was on one side, which is going to explain Pilate here in a minute. But I want us to look there at verse 68 again, or 69, which says, but from now on the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the mighty God. This phrase, Son of Man, actually comes from the book of Daniel. Right? Daniel uses it extensively. It's how Daniel refers to the Messiah, but Daniel is also the one who alludes to the Son of Man being something far more than just a king. Which explains why, verse 70, they said, are you then the Son of God? It jumped. From Messiah to Son of God, those weren't necessarily in the Jewish mind the same people. We understand it that way now. We've been looking at it that way for 2,000 years, so sometimes we miss this. But it's escalating on them. So he replied, "You say that I am." And then they say, "We don't need any more testimony." Because technically that became blasphemy. If you don't accept him as the Son of God, and he says, "Well, you said it," basically affirming. All right, it's a very Jewish way of doing it. He basically says, "Yes, I am the Son of Man, the Son of God." So that's blasphemy. Now they have grounds to execute him. All right, and you have all these officials who are witnesses of it. So, chapter 23, the whole assembly rose and led him off to Pilate. And when they began accusing him, saying, "We have found this man subverting our nation. He opposes payment of taxes to Caesar and claims to be Messiah the King." Okay, anybody catch anything in that?
Taxes to Caesar.
Yeah.
They'd already asked him that, trying to trick him when he got the coin out of the fish's mouth.
Yeah, what did Jesus say?
Render to Caesar what is Caesar's.
Yeah, he actually supported paying taxes, which was a very unpopular stance. But here's another aspect. If you want to kill somebody in this day and age, if you want them executed, Rome has to do it. When Rome conquers nations, they were actually very good to let nations run themselves by and large. Rome was a political beast, all right? They were good at it. They'd put their governors in, they would have their prefects, they would appoint kings. You know, Herod was basically appointed by Caesar. And Caesar would allow them to operate in the culture of their people, except you're going to pay Caesar your taxes and tributes, you're not going to cause problems, and only Caesar bears the sword. Meaning to execute criminals, to reach that level of whatever, can't think of the word that's trying to come in my head, Rome wasn't going to let anybody else do it. All right? If you wanted capital punishment, you had to bow to Caesar. All life was basically Caesar's, was the general idea. You could put them in jail, you could flog them, you could, do lots of things to them, but you couldn't kill them. So they have to take him to Pilate at this point, and Pilate is a political figure. All right? He is the political envoy, the political representation of Rome in Jerusalem. That's why he's there, to be the voice of Rome, to watch for Rome's interests in Jerusalem. So it's a much more poignant accusation to say he opposes paying taxes. That's going to get any official's attention really fast. Much more than saying, well, he claims to be a king. Rome really didn't care who was king. Rome dealt with kings all the time. Kings come and go. They had to appoint them. They had to take them down. If a new king, rebelled and rose up, as long as he bowed to Rome, Rome really wasn't too upset about it. All right? Unless they tried to rebel against Rome, then you had a problem. So they had to throw this other one in there to get Pilate's attention. But Pilate's actually not a dummy, which we're going to see. So Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" In that same weird phrasing, he says yes. Then Pilate announced to the chief priests and the crowd, "I find no basis for a charge against this man." Jesus just admitted to being a king, and Pilate didn't care. That's why the tax thing was thrown in. But Pilate apparently has enough knowledge, he's not buying it. He's a political figure. He knows there's some jealousy. He knows there's other things going on here. There's no way Pilate could be in Jerusalem and not know about Jesus. You got a guy walking around who's been in Jerusalem multiple times, healing all kinds of people, doing all kinds of miracles. And then the stories coming out of the outskirts are even more profound. I guarantee he's been paying attention. Of course, in other accounts, we find out his wife tells him, "Hey, you better not touch this guy." She's scared of him.
Suffered much in the dream.
Yep. So he's not buying any of it. He's like, I don't find any reason. But they insisted. He stirs up all the people all over Judah by his teaching. He started in Galilee and he has come all the way here. On hearing this, Pilate asked if he was a Galilean. And when he learned that Jesus was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was in Jerusalem at the time. Like I said, Pilate was a politician. He finds a way out, he's going to take it. I don't have to make this decision, which is going to be politically dangerous. I mean, don't you think? Sometimes we have trouble putting two and two together, at least I do. When the crowds lined the street and said, Hosanna to David in the highest, or to the Son of David, and they were throwing their coats and the palm leaves, and Jesus rode in on that colt, you don't think Pilate knew that was happening? You don't think he saw the crowd? I think Pilate had probably had a couple of sleepless nights wondering what was going to go on.
I'm sure everybody in Jerusalem knew it's like a Rose Bowl parade over there in the suburbs, you know?
Yeah, and it wasn't in the suburbs. It came all the way to downtown, yeah. Ended up at the Temple Mount, right in the heart of Jerusalem. So, Galilean gets me off the hook. Let me send him to Herod. Like I said, Pilate was not an idiot. He wasn't a good man, but he wasn't an idiot either. So, on hearing this, verse 7, when he learned that Jesus was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at the time. And when Herod saw Jesus, he was greatly pleased because for a long time he'd been wanting to see him from what he had heard about him. He hoped to see him perform a sign of some sort. Again, that's what the Jews actually called miracles, were signs. He plied with him with many questions, but Jesus gave him no answer. The chief priests and the teachers of the law were standing there vehemently accusing him. Then Herod and his soldiers ridiculed and mocked him, dressing him in an elegant robe, and they sent him back to Pilate. That day, Herod and Pilate became friends. Before, they had been enemies. So there's a lot of political maneuvering going on here. I've always wondered, and I don't truly know the answer to this, but there was a prophecy, as a sheep before the shears, he was silent. But to be fair, I've seen videos of sheep being sheared. They're not always so quiet. So I don't quite get that one. But he didn't respond to Herod. He responded to Pilate. He responded to the chief priest. But when he got to Herod, he just didn't say anything. To me, Luke actually makes that make sense. Herod was probably predisposed to want to like Jesus, just as a novelty. Perform a sign. Let me see what you can do. I mean, Jesus has been doing all this stuff. Herod's been hearing about it. He wants to see. But when Jesus just sits there totally quiet and will not respond, what does Herod do? He grows agitated and gets mean. Partly because this has to happen. I mean, that's the part we can't forget either. This is going to happen one way or the other.
Where's the discussion in Luke 9 and 7 where that's, Herod was interested in learning more about him.
Yeah.
And he says, I cut off John's head, but, who's this guy?
Yeah.
Some people are saying, well, John come back, Herod already had an interest in seeing him.
And the sad thing is, Herod actually liked John.
Yeah.
He actually enjoyed hearing John speak. He got trapped in a stupid drunk moment, and it caused him to have to do something he didn't want to do. When his stepdaughter dances and he makes that pledge in front of all of his high-profile friends, and then she asks for the one thing he didn't expect, John's head on a silver platter.
Because of her mother.
Because of her mother, yeah. Herod's probably very anxious to learn about Jesus, but Jesus doesn't give him the opportunity.
Well, in Luke 13:31, some Pharisees came to Jesus and said to him, leave this place and go somewhere else. Herod wants to kill you. True.
Herod may have gone through phases. Because at one point, if he did think he was John the Baptist come back to life, that had to scare him senseless, I would imagine. Especially now that he's doing miracles. But at this point, Herod seemed interested. He wasn't. Of course, Jesus is also in custody. That lets Herod be in control of the situation.
Well, from the time that Jesus was born, they always kind of feared what was going to happen.
Yeah.
With Herod.
Well, Herod's father
His
slaughters, all the children of Nazareth.
So that story has to come down all the way till here. And is he the Messiah, the same one that his father had feared? And what is he going to do?
Yeah. I don't know that Herod had necessarily put that together, but it may have been in the back of his brain.
You would seem as the way they track their history, they do it and like the way
Yeah.
the Jews did. I mean, they knew their history.
I bet he had done the math a few times thinking, he's the right age. So Pilate, verse 13, called together the chief priests, the rulers, and the people. And he said to them, "You brought this man to me as one who was inciting the people to rebellion. I've examined him in your presence, and I have found no basis for your charges against him. Neither has Herod, for he sent him back to us, as you can see. He has done nothing to deserve death. Therefore, I will punish him and then release him." I would argue he's done nothing worthy of punishment either. But if nothing else, he's at the center of this uproar. And Rome does not like uproar. They like peace and quiet. So while punish him, send him out. And by punishing, you're usually meaning the lashes. That was a brutal punishment. Some people actually didn't survive it. But that wasn't good enough. So the whole crowd shouted, and again we've talked about that, "Away with this man, release Barabbas to us." Barabbas had been thrown into prison for an insurrection in the city and for murder.
Ken, I never thought about this before, but I know what a scourging is. Did they also have lashes that was like a whip instead of, or when Paul survived 40 lashes, saved one, is that a scourge?
That may not have been. The scourge tended to be reserved for the worst because the scourge was the cat of nine tails. It would have bone and pottery and other things in the lashes. It would literally rip the body apart. It was reserved, that was more reserved for somebody who was going to be executed. It was just a form of torture beforehand. They had versions of it that didn't have the extra. Or even if it was the cat of nine tails, it didn't have the extra stuff in it. There's sort of two different levels of it. One that really intends to kill in the end, and then one that doesn't. Or at least that's been my understanding of it. But notice the irony here. What's the accusation against Jesus? He's inciting people to insurrection. But who do they want released? A guy who actually led an insurrection and committed murder. Yeah, so you can tell there's no sense to what's happening. This is just bloodlust and the desire for Jesus to die. Wanting to release Jesus, Pilate appealed to them again, but they kept shouting, "Crucify him, crucify him." For the third time he spoke to them, "Why? What crime has this man committed? I have found in him no grounds for the death penalty. Therefore I will have him punished and release him." But with loud shouts they insistently demanded that he be crucified, and their shouts prevailed. I don't want to defend Pilate. I definitely don't want to go that far. But sometimes I think we haven't portrayed him accurately as to why he did what he did. A lot of times we portray Pilate as a coward. Oh, the people were just, getting loud and he didn't like being yelled at, so he's going to do whatever they want. Pilate is responsible to Caesar to keep the peace in Jerusalem. If a riot breaks out, even if he squishes it, Caesar may still squish him. Caesar doesn't like riots. Caesar doesn't like any threat to the domestic tranquility within his empire. He's adamant about that. So as the crowd gets more and more raucous and more out of control, Pilate has to start worrying about what kind of situation he's getting in. And now it's still cowardice because he knows Jesus isn't guilty. So he's going to sacrifice an innocent man to protect himself.
Seems like I read somewhere, and I don't know if this is accurate or not, that Pilate had already been on kind of thin ice with Rome.
I had read that, but I wasn't going to say it because I can't remember the details.
Maybe we read it the same place.
We might have.
What I read was that he had, right before this happened, he was doing something with the water system and was taking the water away from them, so they were about to.
Already mad at him.
Yeah, he was getting some type of water system ran to his part and taking it from their part. And so that was why there was so much anxiety already in place. Of course, all this is history, not in scripture, but do you know what happened to Pilate, or have you read anything of what happened to Pilate after this?
I have, but it has been a long time. He was eventually removed because I think riots did eventually break out. I think is what did cause his downfall in the end anyway. But I'd have to look that up. Don't quote me on that one.
And I think these guys that were, appointed as governors, if they failed and had to be replaced, they usually didn't survive it. It's not like they just, got moved to a different position. Well, they sort of did.
Well, yeah.
Alive to dead.
Yeah.
They got moved to a 6 foot under. Hold on. This is the nice thing about using a digital Bible, I guess. Let me see if I can find the answer to that real quick. I don't need to know about Southwest Airlines pilots. Never mind. That wasn't going to work so well. I'll look that up for next week. I'm curious. It's been a long time since I read that. All right, so verse 25, he released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, the one they had asked for, and surrendered Jesus to their will. So as the soldiers led him away, they seized Simon from Cyrene, who was on his way in from the country, and put the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus. A large number of people followed him, including women who mourned and wailed for him. And Jesus turned and said to them, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children. For the time will come when you will say, 'Blessed are the childless women, the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed.' Then they will say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and the hills, 'Cover us.' For if people do these things when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry?" All right, a couple things here. Let's look at Simon real quick. Odds are the part of the cross Jesus was carrying was just the cross member. All right, if you looked at normal Roman crucifixions, the cross was sort of a two-piece deal. It wasn't pre-assembled and you carry the whole thing up. One, that would have been extremely heavy, and most people, including Jesus, had already been brutally beaten. That's why they got Simon to do it, actually. Jesus had been flogged, all 40, not 40 save one. He's condemned to death, so he gets all 40. He has survived that. That's why he's been beaten before that, just by the guards in general. And now he has to carry this timber to his execution. He falls under the weight. They grab this guy coming in from out of town, make him carry it. So that's that part of it. Luke focuses in on the idea of these women wailing. And here's where, to me, it gets interesting, because you would think with the scene we saw in Pilate's courtyard, everybody would be cheering, right? Now, once the crucifixion's for real, it starts to affect the whole city. So you have these women following wailing, mourning what's going to happen. Now, I will also say that's also just Jewish culture at the time. They were actually known at funerals to hire professional mourners. So they would yell louder and wail louder and make people think the person was really loved and whatnot. Sounds weird to us, but that was just part of their culture. But look at what Jesus says to them. He goes, don't cry for me. What you will go through will be far worse. And specifically, that last verse, if people do things like this when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry? And basically, he said the idea is we're in good times, roughly. And look how horrible people are behaving. What's going to happen when things really get rough? And it's going to. You know, by AD 70, Jerusalem falls. The temple's destroyed. Tens of thousands of people are killed at least. All right? There's going to be some bad times. Titus laid siege to Jerusalem for a long time. How do you think people behaved at that point? So Jesus is sort of pointing out what's happening to me is not worse than what's going to happen in the future. That's also partly to tie back to that prophecy there in verse 30, which I remember at Hosea. Yeah, Hosea 10:8 is that one. All right, we'll stop there. We'll do the two criminals next week. I heard the deal, and I like to spend some time on the criminals. They're interesting to me. Very, very interesting to me. Any questions or comments, though? Clear as mud. Awesome. So,
Paige was baptized last night.
I heard that. So Paige Martinez was baptized last night. So if you see her, congratulations. Well, it's funny because I heard car doors. I look out, I said, somebody's at the building. Oh, well. I'm not a security guard. I haven't figured that out. And actually, I recognize most of the vehicles, so I wasn't too worried. But no, hug. Embarrass her a little bit. She needs it. Anything else? All right. Perry, would you lead us in a prayer to close out?
Father, we're thankful for this day and the time you've given us to come here and look at your word. Help us to, each and every day, to look to offer a kind word or help the people we come in contact with. Lord, help us to be able to show the love that you have for us. Continue to be with those who are not feeling well, who've lost their loved ones, different things happening in a lot of people's lives. Help us all to be able to be comfort and strength to those people. Continue to watch over us. Thank you so much. Thank you for loving us and forgiving us.
Amen.